What's up, everybody? It's me, Preacher, and I am back for another episode of Preacher's Corner. I am excited for this next guest. He isn't just working in the recovery field, he has walked the road himself. From struggle to strength, his story is raw, real, and full of redemption. And so trust me, you're not going to want to miss this one. And so without further ado, here we go. In 3, 2, 1, let's go. What is up, everybody? We are back for another episode of Preacher's Corner. I am your host, Preacher. Today we have an awesome guest. This has been a while in the making. And I used to work with him at a homeless shelter in the city close to where I live. And then I ended up getting into addiction and all that. And then I believe it was one of our old coworkers was like, "Yeah, you should talk to him. He's doing his own thing now." And so I reached out to Shayne, and here we are. So Shayne, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm glad you could jump on. I'm excited to just hear. I really I knew that you had a history of addiction, but I've never really heard about your time in addiction. So I'm excited to just hear that. And then just both of us are big into working with the community, and so I'm excited just to talk about how faith, because I know faith is important to both of us.
Mhm.
I mean, we're on a podcast right now called Preacher's Corner, and a little bit something you might not know. My nickname comes from the fact that I worked at Open Door Mission, and one day so this was pre-addiction, but I was hanging out with people right there around Mount Reed in Lyland. So I was bringing a pizza to this one girl because I was giving them food and clothing and things like that. And I pulled up, and she sent this one guy out, and he looked at me. He's like, "You look awfully familiar." And he's like, "You're that preacher man from Open Door Mission." And so after that, everybody called me Preacher, and so the name stuck. And then even when I came into recovery, I was going to drop the name, but someone told me, they're like, "No, people know you by Preacher."
At least it's a good nickname.
Absolutely. So it kind of works in God's favor, because when I drop Bible verses in groups, and I'm an admin for a Facebook recovery group, and I use every now and then I'll drop a Bible verse or two, and nobody is shocked when a guy with the nickname Preacher drops a Bible verse. So it's kind of worked out in the good favor. So but I really this is something that I love, and I'm glad that you could come on, and I'm excited to hear your story. And so and like I was saying, we'll just talk about how all the three coincide: faith, recovery, and the community. And so before we jump in, like I told you before, we ask every guest for 3 interesting facts. So Shayne, what are your 3 interesting facts?
All right, 3 interesting facts about me. I think first is family. I have a wife and a kid, Everett, 5 years old. And this last year, I started a nonprofit called Renewed Recovery. And the last one, I really enjoy music, so I love writing, recording, producing music.
That's awesome.
So those are my 3.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So before we look at what you do at Rounded Recovery, that's what it's called, right? Renewed Recovery.
Yeah.
I was trying to look at the name, and I thought it was renewed, but I'm like, that looks like rounded.
I thought I misspelled it or something.
Nope, just my bad. So what of course your time in addiction is what really influenced what you do at Renewed Recovery. But what led to that time in addiction? Like, prior to you being in addiction, what kind of situations and circumstances came about to get you into that spot?
Yeah, I mean, with addiction, it's pain medication, right?
Okay.
There's 2 types of pain. There's physical and emotional.
Absolutely.
So like most of people who maybe struggle with addiction, for me, it came in from childhood. So a lot of emotional pain, trauma, just the dysfunction and chaos.
Yeah.
So, as a kid, you don't really know, hey, this isn't right. This isn't how things should be. So I looked for an escape, something that could make me temporarily feel better, forget about the pain. So I would say that in a nutshell, without getting too specific. Because there wasn't any substances around when I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
I encountered those later on in high school with friends with the same problems, like family life at home and parents' marriage, and that gets put on the kids, and then they're looking for escape. So,
I say that all the time. Addiction, because a lot of people, like we talked before we started recording, there's a stigma on people in recovery, and then a huge stigma on people in active addiction. And I think a lot of times people look at people that are or were in addiction, and they say, well, addiction is your problem.
Right.
but really addiction is the solution
Yeah.
to a deeper problem. And I love that I'm able to have this platform like where I talk about faith because we know ultimately that that solution even to addiction is Christ. And then in turn he's the solution to whatever you were using to cover over.
Yeah.
And so like it just I know, and I want to see what you have to say. Like I know prior to, because I mean I started using crack back in 2023. Was it 2020? Yeah. So last year I just had my 1 year yesterday.
Oh, nice.
So I'm like 1 year down, many more to
Congrats.
go.
Yeah.
So I started probably like October of 2023, and my wife and I we were separated, and so there was the problem, but of course it was a deeper problem.
Right.
And it just happened to be that I like it was a unperfect storm that happened.
Yeah.
But I noticed, like, just looking back now in recovery on my whole life, that while it wasn't something hard like crack, there were different things like women and like getting deep into PlayStation or Xbox.
Yeah. Yeah.
I even look at my time as a student pastor. I used that to as a solution to escape from different things. And so looking back prior to like actually getting into, you said what was your DOC?
Alcohol.
So getting into alcohol and like prior to that, what kind of things do you notice that you used as that solution?
Yeah. I would say codependency.
Hmm.
Yeah. Relationship addiction. And so even relationships that weren't maybe good for you,
Yeah,
they're good for us, and it's despite all the consequences, I'm going to continue to stay in this thing.
because it makes
And
me feel good.
yeah, yeah. So I'd say, and that has other manifestations like people pleasing and not being able to say no.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When did you start noticing that alcohol was that solution that you were using?
Yeah. I specifically remember a time. This is after years of Friday, Saturday, Sunday binge drinking religiously. I had a moment where I was at some party. I don't really remember where I was, but everyone was just sprawled all over the floor, and I just had this like very like um, moment, even though I was completely intoxicated, of clarity. Just like, is this all there is? Like,
Mm,
this is life. Like, and I remember feeling very depressed, like thinking
yeah,
about like this is what I'm going to do every weekend. Because looking around me, it was this it was just a mess.
yeah,
People's relationships, fighting even at parties, especially at parties, and this person did the drama, the all the stuff that goes along with that lifestyle, and the fights and the yeah. So I just got to that point of like, if this is all there is to life, like I don't want this.
yeah,
Like, yeah, I want something else. I didn't even know what that was, and this was before I accepted Christ, and
yeah.
you know,
You just knew there was like you just knew while I'm looking at this isn't
yeah,
what I want.
yeah,
That's a powerful thing to think, but scary at
yeah,
the same time, especially if you don't know what it is that you want.
yeah.
Like, because then you're like
Searching.
I've really built my life around this. Like
Yeah,
now, what do I do?
yeah. In some of the curriculum we use from Genesis Process by Michael Dye, he calls it the empty place.
Mm.
Yeah, it's just that void.
I think
Yeah,
and I like hearing you say it and how he calls it the void, like the empty space.
yeah,
Like I know a lot of people, even myself. Like even when it not only happens when like right there where you make the decision to stop, but I found myself like the first couple months into recovery, like what do I do? Like
yeah,
because I spent my whole life defining myself off of like some type of identity of what I do, like whether it was a soldier in the army or a pastor or working at the homeless shelter or
yeah,
like put blank whatever. I was defining myself by that, and so then I was sitting there in Farmington, like at this veterans place, and there was like 13 other vets, and one day I was in my room, like so I had April 16th of last year decided like okay I'm done like on the street. I had stopped April 13th and went to actually find a place to stay, and I had to go to the hospital because I had fluid around my heart and lungs,
mm,
and so they put me in strong. May 1st I got to this veterans house, but as I was sitting there I almost felt what you're saying, that empty space. Like I was like, what do I do now?
yeah.
Like
Who am I?
everything that I defined myself
Yeah,
as off of my identity has been
yeah.
stripped away. Even my identity as an addict was stripped away. Like,
Right, right.
and
Yeah,
so I think that is like the huge like, and I know a lot of these groups will talk about like your higher power and things like that, but I think that's why it's so important to find your identity in Christ. Like yes, talk about
yeah,
your higher power, but like it can't even stop there. You have to realize who your higher power is.
yeah,
And I think once I realized that, like, and I and what's crazy is I told students all the time, and even at Open Door Mission when I would preach, like, your identity's in Christ, remember who you are in Christ, and all that. But I don't think I ever realized it for myself. And when I realized, like, no, this is who you are in Christ, like that changed everything.
yeah, yeah. Only God can fill the empty place. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Other things won't. Temporarily, they might. But
Well, and that shows just because that's what whatever substance or drug someone's using. That's what, or even a person, like whatever you're using as that solution that
yeah,
temporarily fills that I some places call it that God-sized hole,
yeah, yeah,
and it will fill it temporarily. And it's just like what Jesus tells the woman at the well, like you're going to keep coming back, you're going
yeah,
to keep coming back, and you're not going to be satisfied until you have me.
yeah,
And so that's and I said that a lot pre-addiction. Like, yeah, one's not gonna be enough. You're gonna want more and more. But I never really understood it. And then I fell into addiction, and I understood what that meant. And then I realized, like, once I truly realized who I was in Christ, I'm like, yeah, I don't need that. Like,
yeah. It's a lot more freedom, a lot more freedom. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so looking at what you do, and we'll dive into what it is that you do. How would you say? Because I'm sure to start renewed recovery, you had to look at a couple different programs and look at and I know you did stuff at Open Door Mission as
Mhm.
far as like recovery, and so looking at things like the 12 steps, because yes, it has like a biblical base, but anybody can use the 12 steps.
Yeah,
And so looking at things like the 12 steps and different recovery programs, how different do you think it is, and what importance do you see implementing and including the Bible into recovery?
sure. Yeah. So I'm definitely like a holistic recovery guy, because we're such complicated beings that God has made.
Absolutely.
We have a body that has organs and things that like your brain that's very heavily involved in addiction. You have a soul or spirit, so we can worship our Creator. We also have the social life. We build relationships, and if you get into mental health as well. So I don't like to neglect any of those things. That's why, when starting Renewed, I was like, I want the organization to almost be a living recovery uh, program itself, like plan.
Mm,
So like that's why we do like a holistic, like we do like retreats, like
I love
we
that.
go, yeah, we go out in nature, have a Bible study, and that's also social bonding. We go on a hike. We have group nights where we work through a set of curriculum that we want to do. So basically, yeah, we just take the things that we really find that have worked. There's a lot of good programs, materials out there, and yeah, we there's something about doing something together.
Absolutely.
You're not in it alone, and you can't do recovery alone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I find it interesting, like just because like so I work for FLACRA, and so I see it from almost the other side, like
Yeah, but it's
because
very
I can't
clinical.
walk in and be like, hey,
Yeah,
this verse says,
yeah.
uh,
So like
uh,
the clinical side.
yeah,
Yeah,
and so it's like, well, I'm a peer advocate, so I see I haven't seen much of the clinical side. I've heard a lot about it just from like when we do supervisions and things like that.
yeah.
I've heard other peers talking about it. Like I work at the Connections in Newark, and so
Okay, yeah,
like it's I love it because I have a little more freedom than someone would clinically.
yeah,
But I still have times where I have to catch myself because I want to be like, well, Jesus, but I'm like,
yeah,
no,
yeah.
you can't.
The
Don't do
spiritual side. Yeah,
yeah. And
yeah,
so how how much more freedom would you say you feel knowing that like you can like well Jesus said this and things
yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Like how much more freedom do you think you feel in that regards?
Oh, a lot more. So there's no constraint in that area. We're
Yeah.
a Christian organization. We'll have to hire you at some
Hey,
point.
hey.
Um,
If it's open, I might come.
yeah.
I love flat growth, but
Yeah, so we don't also bar anybody from joining our programs.
yeah,
They just have to understand, like, hey, we're holistic, so part of that is spiritual, and the spiritual part to us means the gospel, and
absolutely.
means redemption, and that we have through Jesus. So yeah, I just love that freedom. It's, like I said, like, hey, we want to go do a retreat where we just slow down and kind of put aside all the struggles and issues we have in our daily lives and
Which
reconnect
has
with
to be
God.
amazing.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Just
Uh,
being able to be out in creation, like,
yeah,
and I can't even imagine the closeness that you feel with God and at those times. Like,
yeah, yeah. We
that's
we, we love it because sometimes you get in environments, whether it's clinical, right, or even church, right? Like
yeah,
you get in this environment where you have to put on a mask, or what I mean, like you're expected to be and behave a certain way, and
absolutely.
you're not allowed to have any struggles, or
Well, I think
it's
that is, and I say it all the time. I believe that is almost I wouldn't say the main reason, but one of the biggest reasons why I was so broken and fell into addiction. Like, because I felt like, well, I'm the student pastor, and like, I mean, Lakeshore isn't a small church in Rochester, and
yeah,
so like, and now I'm the student pastor at one of the biggest churches in the city, and so now like, and then I was doing Flower City Work Camp, and at first I started doing it like just as like helping, but now I'm on the stage. And so wherever I go, students all over Rochester know who I am and people know who I am. And so it was getting to my head because I'm like, I'm a celebrity in the church world. And then I think as you get deeper in that level, there is, you have to live up to the standard. And so you're like, whew, I can't let anybody know how I'm feeling. Like my wife and
Right.
I separated, and I had to be like, well, I didn't have to be, but I thought I had to be all good. And so when people ask me how I was, I'm like, oh, like it hurts, but Romans 8:28, like
Yeah.
all things
Yeah.
work together for good. And so like at church and during the week when I'd go in for work, like I'd be put on this happy face, and
Yeah.
I'm Pastor Antoine.
Yeah.
But then I go home and I'm like, oh, like it was exhausting. And like I even remember like right before, so I had started doing Uber because I went from two incomes to down to one, and so I was like, man, let me do Uber, and it stopped me from being by myself with my thoughts.
Yeah.
So I started doing Uber, got connected with the wrong people, started hanging out with them, and what I started realizing was I can be real around these people. Like
Yeah.
I can't talk to my kids right now; they can't see their kids. Like I felt like I could, that I had more in common with the people that were using
Better
rather
connection.
than the people
Yeah.
at church, which
Yeah.
was a terrible thing, especially when I was feeling as broken as I was. And so,
Yeah.
and then once I started using, then I really felt this disconnect because during the day I'm going and I'm just going through these motions, but I'm starting to fall asleep
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
work. And my office was right across the hall from the lead pastor. So like, and when I fall asleep, I snore. So here I am, like,
Yeah.
and he's like, "What's going on?" And you can only tell them I didn't get enough sleep, like not only so much.
Yeah.
And so like it just got to the point where I couldn't hide it, but I
Yeah.
had to put on this mask. But I like to equate it as like when a kid cleans up their room and they try to throw everything into the closet, and you
Yeah.
can only throw so much into the closet before you can't shut it, and it just comes pouring out. And that's what happened to me. Like I had to eventually step down because I couldn't keep it in the closet anymore.
You can't manage
And
it. Yeah.
absolutely, and so and then I felt so like, and I think another thing, like I'm the one who helps people, like
Yeah.
so who do I have to go to? And so like I think those things, putting on that mask and trying to hide it, it just like helps lead to getting into that
Yeah.
addiction.
Yeah. There's all these things that set you up for the fall. Like,
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. So looking at your addiction and everything, and what you went through, there was a point that you came to where you said, I want to like work in this recovery field. And so what inspired you really? Because before you started renewed recovery, you were working at Open Door Mission. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
what inspired you to work in the addiction recovery field, and how has your faith really influenced that path?
Yeah. I guess before we get there, like, so my addiction led to like I think I told you a failed suicide attempt.
Hmm.
And so I don't know. I just always had like a soft spot for people that were struggling.
Yeah.
Because there just didn't really seem to be a space, even at church, for that. Every Sunday people are doing great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's an acceptable answer.
Yeah. Um, so I graduated college, and I was in a pretty dead end job at the time, and I just remember praying like, God, like I'll do anything. Like
Yeah.
I really wanted to get into ministry, and I had like all these ideas of like, oh, I'm gonna work for this church, and nothing opened up except for a job I didn't apply to.
That isn't
Yeah.
God right there.
Yeah, I'm applying to like 30 plus jobs a week and nothing. And so I think you remember Howie,
Yep.
Howie Revens. He gives me a call and, hey, would you like to interview at Open Our Mission for the recovery program? So I was like, huh, like, sure. And so God opened that door, and I had the privilege of serving and working there for 10 years.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and learning a lot. What was interesting was like just I did a lot of recovery work with people there. Like I didn't realize how much I had, kind of like you said, like I was this white knuckling,
Mhm.
even though I had a bunch of years
Yeah.
of sobriety. I was just barely holding on in some ways, and I was so glad how he was a sponsor of mine and did a lot of work with me. And I was like, oh man, I didn't realize how much I had stuffed down and not processed, and so that was a godsend. Like not only being able to work there, but also just healing at the same time.
Yeah. Definitely.
So, yeah.
You mentioned the suicide attempt. Looking back on that, what did that come about because of your addiction, or that place, that really being in that empty space and not knowing really what to do, where to go?
Yeah.
And of course, I would assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, that probably came before your relationship with Christ, and
Yeah.
like no hope.
Yeah.
You and then getting rid of the only solution
Yeah.
that took pain away.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, I would say both. Really, that's the answer. I had a failed relationship that I thought was gonna pan out, to marriage, and it didn't work out. And all of our mutual friends who I drank with, they didn't want to, hang out anymore.
Take
So
your cool until you don't want to
yeah,
do what they're doing.
I had no friends that summer, and again, the job I just hated. I was miserable. Student loans.
Mm.
Had to move back
Those
in with my
lovely student
yeah.
loans.
I had to move back in with my parents. It's just a bunch of stuff that
Yeah,
man, life is just not going. I just finished college. I thought college is supposed to help me, get to the next quote unquote level.
yeah.
And that just wasn't my experience. And so after all, it was just like you said, just that imperfect storm. And so I was like, well, I don't want to be here anymore. And two, getting off of the alcohol, I didn't know at the time my brain was rewiring and trying to cope without it,
Yeah.
So I went into a severe depression without it. And tried to pull in my car to the garage, and the car wouldn't start.
That's God. That's God right there.
The next day, my friend from work, the job I hated, hey, do you want to come to a Bible study on Friday nights?
Wow.
I was like, a Bible study on Friday night? Like, that's clubbing.
But I love what God did there, because a Friday night, that's when you usually would be out drinking.
Yeah.
And so he's like, hey, I'm going to take this day that you used to like dedicate to destroying your life.
Yeah.
How about you come in and put your life back together?
Yeah. So I went the whole summer.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's
and
awesome.
that was really the social part of my recovery. Wasn't aware.
Yeah.
Because I had no friends at the time. And so these Christians, which I wasn't a Christian, were nice to me. Invited me, and so I was like, all right, well, it's better than no one. Like I was probably like in some ways using them like at the time, but God had different plans, and it was gracious. And
what would you say was the moment that you, because you and I know, and for anybody that's watching, like you can have a knowledge of Christ, but then there's a difference between knowing him and then actually knowing him. And so when, like, of course you probably gained a huge knowledge of him while you're going to a Bible study and things like that. And so when did you have that moment where you're like, okay, I need to take this next step and actually have a relationship with him rather than just coming and hanging out with him?
Yeah, I remember that vividly. My brother was a Christian way before me, and he would invite me, and I'd always say no to church. So after I started going to Bible study, he invited me to church on Sunday. So I was like, yeah, I'll go. And I think the youth pastor had to preach. He was, the regular pastor wasn't.
That's when they throw us youth pastors.
Yeah. So I remember he preached a sermon on just 40 minutes straight of like, have you ever done this? Just kind of, it seemed at the first very like, whoa. I was like, I've done that a lot. Like just all these check boxes. And at the end, he just, well, I have the best news for you. He just waited till the last like 15 minutes. It was so convicting, but then on the last 15 minutes, like I remember feeling very uncomfortable and like, I've done this. I'm like, oh my gosh, what do I do? What do I do? And he last 15 minutes, just, well, I have great news for you. Jesus paid for all that. If you put your trust, I remember right then and there.
I've got a lot of bad news, but here's the good news.
Yeah. So I just gave my life right then and there. And
that's awesome.
I think the next week, my brother and I got baptized together.
That's wow.
Yeah.
That's I'm sure that is probably one of the like most memorable moments of his life. Just knowing that he kept inviting you and you kept saying no, and then how shocked was he when he asked you the one time and you were like,
I think it was, yeah.
It's like, time out, wait a second. Did he say yes?
Yeah.
So looking at like, so you go through addiction, you have this moment where you tried to like take yourself out. And then you end up doing the Bible study and then accepting Christ. And then you get offered this position at Open Door Mission. And so you work there, and what led to you saying, okay, now it's time for me to leave here? Almost like an Abraham moment. Like, because like naturally someone in their mind wouldn't say like, I'm going to leave this to start this. Because then you're like, I'm leaving something secure to something that I don't even know if it's going to like take off or not.
Right.
Because then you have to find people to, it's not like you're opening up a store where people are like, oh, a new store open.
Yeah.
Like you have to find people that are broken and willing to now enter into a program to become clean. And so what led to that point to be like, I need to leave here and go where I feel God is calling me?
Yeah. A lot of it, after 10 years, I felt like I had a lot of good experience and knowledge I've gained. And then I hit this kind of ministry wall. And, I probably waited even too long, but I remember just feeling God saying like, just go. And, like, just kind of like, where, and so I just kind of listened, and I thought things were going to go very smooth, but, we were working on an app for recovery at this other company, Genesis, and it got delayed like a year almost. And, all these things that I, didn't plan for. So then I took this very obscure job that came out of left field again. But I learned everything I needed to learn at that job in the 7 months I was there.
It's crazy how God does that.
Yeah, about how to start a successful nonprofit, and God gave me like all the tools I needed, and I wasn't sure at the beginning, so here I am now.
Well, I look at just so I love apologetics, and one of the apologetics like passages in the Bible is Acts 17 when Paul goes to Athens and he walks up and
Yeah.
he's sitting at the Areopagus and talking with
Yep.
them, and he says something that I love, and he says like he's talking about the fact that one God created all nations to dwell on the face of the earth, and he established their borders and their boundaries and where they'll
Yeah.
be. And so it's like, cool, God put everywhere at the exact time they did, when they did, for a specific reason. And then it's like, well, what was the reason? It says so that they would reach for him and find him, yet he wasn't far from any one of them. And
Yep.
so God has put in each and every one of us, every interaction we have, because that is the best opportunity for us to be able to have a relationship with him. And so I believe that every interaction we have is when we come into relationship with Christ, we can look back on these interactions and these relationships and see how they accomplish whatever God's purpose for us is. And
Yep.
so like I look at like just the time at Open Door Mission and me being able to get to know you and meet you, because like I hear your story and I hear that you started this renewed recovery, and like I have this Preacher's Corner platform, and I have one thing I learned from working at Lakeshore, like the pastor there, Pastor Vince, extreme visionary. Like
Mm.
I think one of the most as far as like casting vision, I've never seen anybody do it like him. And so I've sat down with him a lot and talked about like what it means for a leader to cast vision and have vision and things like that. And so as I sat and came up with Preacher's Corner, I didn't just look and say, okay, this is what I want to do for the next year, but I looked like 5 years down the road and 10 years
Yeah.
down the road. And part of my plan for Preacher's Corner, and this is why I love that we've connected. I want to start my own, and because I see there's in Monroe County there's like you, and there's Celebrate Recovery and things like
Yeah.
that. But in like Wayne County and Ontario County and all those, like Seneca County, there's FLACRA,
Yeah.
and that's about it. And so, but there isn't like a Christian based recovery center, and so that was like in my mind, like eventually I want to get to the point and start the corner, and on the
Yeah.
corner is where you find hope, like, and so take it, of course, keep it in the Preacher's Corner brand, like, and because I used to go to McNaughton all the time, and because I had 3 people living in my car, and
Mm.
2 of them would stand on the corner of McNaughton, and we know what happens on the corner of McNaughton. And so I always say in my brain, like addiction brings us to corners just like that, but you
Yeah.
can find hope at the corner, and that's where you find Christ. And so like I just look at that interaction. I had to throw that out there because I hear just how like what led you to having that thought. Like I've learned all along the way, and almost like Moses, God has given me all these tools along the way in order to accomplish what the main purpose was.
Yeah.
And so like a lot of people would be like 10 years at Open Door Mission. That led to like yes, because how much stuff are you able to use from Open Door Mission in what you do today? Like and
Yeah. Every day.
then
Every day.
everything else, like.
Yeah.
And so looking at addiction and everybody that has been addicted or going through addiction, from your perspective, because we talked about stigmas and how people wear masks and things like that. Like I know when I got into recovery, I went to Lakeshore for a baptism, and I got a text, and I understand, like now I understand what he was doing because he has to protect those that are in the church. But I got a text saying like, don't come back, basically, because people felt uncomfortable. And I think we don't understand, or we feel uncomfortable about what we don't understand. And
Yeah.
so, from your perspective, what are common misconceptions about addiction, those stigmas that people within our faith community have, and not just faith community, the Christian community have, the churches at large?
Yeah. I would say it's always easier to judge, and then push away something you don't want,
Absolutely.
uncomfortable to deal with. But I think the biggest misconception is just what addiction is.
Mm.
Like so it's a habitual coping behavior. And it's destructive, so it falls in the sin and the spiritual side, the sinful category. But it's also it becomes a disease.
Mm.
So for instance, like the consequence is a disease, and what a disease is just when an organ doesn't work right in your body.
Absolutely.
So like if you get heart disease, liver disease, there's no stigma around that.
Absolutely. We have a brain disease.
Yeah, so it is
mental disease.
Yeah, the your brain is an organ. So I always give this example to guys when I teach classes. Like, so if you have your computer, right, and if you start pouring coffee and soda and all sorts of stuff, and it falls down the stairs, do you expect it to work the same way? It's a physical thing, right?
Absolutely.
Your brain is a real physical thing, and God designed it to function a certain way. But when you start using chemicals or substances or even behaviors like gambling or pornography, it changes your brain, like physically, and those connections that take place on the neurons, that level. So it's like it's tough because you can't see it,
Absolutely.
So it's like it's not just as simple as we'll just stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was going to say that because I've heard so many. I remember when I like first started like struggling, and like then I remember coming out of addiction and talking to some people, and I'm like, yeah, like it's hard to do this. And I had Christians telling me like, what do you mean it's hard?
Yeah.
Just don't do it. And
Right.
I'm like, it's not that easy.
Because
They're
they
like,
are
it's just
they
like any
already
other sin. Just stop.
yeah they already don't do it. So
Yeah,
yeah yeah why it's recovery. If we define that, recovery is the return to a healthy state.
absolutely,
That's physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally,
absolutely,
socially. So that's a process.
absolutely.
And that can take a long time. The average year, a year of abstinence or not using for your brain to start to rewire, and then 2 to 5 years for long-term recovery to take root.
Yeah.
So
And I love what you said about like that, because I like to say like, because there's a difference between being sober and being in recovery.
yeah
And like I say it all the time on the podcast here, and then on the Facebook Live that I'm an admin at. Like we say it like sober is a state of being, while being in recovery is a mindset. Like
yeah
because you can be sober and not be in recovery. Like
right
I remember like, and you even said you used on the weekends for some time. Like so for Monday through Thursday you were sober. Like and
yeah
then even like for me, like I remember like I was like, okay, like during the week I can't smoke. So but as soon as I get out of work on Friday, I am there and I will start smoking crack. Like and but I was sober Monday through Thursday. And so like I well Sunday through Thursday, and then Friday and Saturday I was just going in.
yeah
And I that those are those lies that our brain tells us. And it's
yeah
that's exactly what's diseased is our brain, and it's telling us you're good.
yeah
You're good.
the
You're
stinking thinking.
fine.
Call it the stinking thinking.
The
Yeah,
stinking thinking. I
or
love it.
we call it false beliefs in Genesis. In the recovery work we do.
I love that. False
Yeah
beliefs. Believing
yeah
that you're good when you're really not.
yeah
Yeah, I
just
like
things that
that.
aren't really true. Because you can act on something that's not true, but you believe it to be true.
I like that.
Yeah. So yeah, one of the tools we use is. Do you remember the Faster scale?
Uh vaguely.
Okay.
Vaguely.
So you have recovery, which is like a state of peace,
Yep.
and yeah, you're taking care of all your responsibilities, all the things God has given you, family, church life, all that. And then as you move away, F is forget priorities, which is including recovery. And then A is anxiety. S is speeding up, trying to outrun, basically all your responsibilities. Anxiety, you don't want anxiety. And then
Sounds
T,
about right.
T is ticked off. Yeah, T is ticked off. So if something comes along that, makes you resentful, whatever it is in your day. And then E is exhausted.
Mm.
And then that's the worst place to be because you're the most vulnerable.
Mm.
And then
And
R,
that's they do say
yeah,
that. Like
yeah,
don't Satan comes when you're hungry and tired.
yeah. And then R is relapse. So that's the place we
Mm.
don't want to go back, that we swore
Yeah.
we'd never go back to. So that's a tool we use a lot in our
Mm.
recovery. We'll just ask, hey, where you are on the Faster scale. Because it's
That's awesome.
what it is it's a typical day, 24-hour day. Everyone's got priorities that pile up. They give us anxiety. And then to cope, we can easily go back to a substance or a behavior.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Dang. And when you think about it, like the further you get from God, like it does, like, and that's like even outside of addiction and recovery. Like
Yeah.
the further we get away from God, the closer we get to falling to whatever temptation comes our
Yeah.
way. And so that like that, I love that because that can be used regardless of where you are.
Yeah.
Looking at, because we should as a Christian body be looking at the community as a whole. And
Mhm.
so, and sadly, not many churches do recovery work.
Yeah.
And so that becomes a burden of, and not a burden as in like, oh man, I don't want to do this, but just a weight that we advocates really have to play.
Yeah.
And like, okay, if you guys aren't going to do it, I guess us rebels
Yeah.
have to.
Yeah.
And so looking at that, like I think we almost, not only do we have a responsibility to come alongside people in addiction and recovery, but we have a responsibility to speak to the churches and be like, hey, like we can't do this by ourselves. Like
Yeah.
we need your help. And so what steps do you think a church can take to become more welcome? Because like I told you, I had that moment where I went and they told me not to come back. And if I didn't have the supports I had around me, that could have led to relapse.
Yeah.
Because I even had the thought, like,
Yeah.
when they told me that like, man, if I was any closer to Rochester, I might have been like in the spot to use. And so how can churches become more welcoming and supportive to individuals struggling with addiction and people that are in recovery?
Yeah. So only about 10% of churches have recovery programs, which
Wow.
is sad.
And that I feel blessed that, I don't know if you've heard of Cross Creek
Yeah.
in Palmyra. I'm blessed to call that my church. Like,
Yeah.
and so it's awesome. Like this coming Wednesday, I'm playing drums at CR,
Oh, nice.
so I can get my 1 year chip. Like,
Yeah.
and so I just love that there are churches that do it, but it's crazy. Only 10%.
Yeah, only 10%. And what's sad is, recovery is really, it's just a healing process. And I say all the time, like, Jesus heals, he still heals. And you know what I mean? Like, from a disease
Does he? Get
standpoint,
out of here.
yeah. Well, you know what I mean? Like, from a disease standpoint, it's like, don't you want people to get well or get better?
Absolutely.
So I think a big thing is just educating, like, the church on what addiction is, what recovery is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, reducing those stigmas. I mean, even if you talk, we run a lot of pornography recovery groups. And statistically, 75% of men in churches struggle with that. So 75% of a given church, 75% of the men are struggling.
That's
with,
crazy.
And 44% of women.
And that's
yeah.
a majority of your congregation.
Right. So, it's a lot of times it's like there's just there's no awareness, like, oh, this is a problem, or substances or behaviors. And so then you start to educate and talk about, the statistics, and just like, well, yeah, like most people it's easier to hide those addictions, but
food addictions.
Well, then that's another one. And that's where helping people understand, like, the recovery process, like, there's things you have to do. Like, let's talk. My wife works in food addiction, so it's, what's your if you want to lose 100 whatever pounds, what's your plan?
Yeah.
You can pray all day, and but there's still some things you have to do that God will help you do. He'll give you the strength to do that. And you need other people. So what's your plan to get to recovery, which is a healthier state as God intends. And so yeah, it's really educating the church on what these things are. Again, like everyone has some sort of coping behavior. So like you mentioned, video games, technology, phones. Can you imagine?
Phones are a big one.
Can you imagine telling the church, like, hey, we're gonna be a phone-free church?
You're not gonna have a lot of people in your church.
Yeah, because, it's a cope. I forgot the statistics for, like, the average amount of people check their phone every day. It's like,
wow,
it's over 100 times. Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah. So yeah, really creating, I guess, like, just the awareness, and then a space. Hopefully, a space they respond with, like, oh wow, we need some kind of a program or some sort of group for our church for people. Because that's the picture Paul gave in Corinthians. If there's hurting people among you, like
the church is a place for sick people.
Yeah, we should care about that, because if we're a body, and a part of the body isn't well.
Because I love the way you explained it being a disease, because not many people explain it that way.
Right.
And I love that you explain it that way, because now that gives people no excuse of why they aren't accepting someone who is in addiction and trying to help them. Like, you're not going to turn the hospitals would get sued if they turned people away who came for help.
Right. Yeah.
And I think a lot of times, how many people in churches are battling some form of addiction, but it's an acceptable addiction.
Right. Yeah.
And now they're looking at this person who is addicted to a substance, and it's almost like the stigma is on the substance rather than the addiction.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I mean, yeah, I'm addicted to food, but I mean, it's not crap.
Yeah. Well, like, food's the biggest addiction. So, like,
absolutely. And I was just saying last night, that's the one I feel most broken for, because unlike like crack, cocaine, heroin, meth, things like that, you can't walk into a store for those. Alcohol, you can walk into a store, but you still have an age limit. If you go to a bar to get it, some bars are like, yo, bro, you've been here a lot of times and you always act out, you're not coming in. So there's ways to stop people from even getting alcohol and things like that. But food, like, you can't tell someone go cold turkey. And I said, like, the other day, even the words cold turkey, it includes food. Like, it's so, like, you can't just go cold turkey on food. You need food to survive. And so I think that's the one I feel the most broken about, because you have to find this balance on how much do I need to survive and how much is going to lead to my death.
Yeah. And when you boil it down, all addictions are chemicals.
Absolutely.
Food is chemicals when your body breaks it down. And then behavioral ones, you just create the chemicals in your brain. So, like gambling and pornography. So, and then, throwing dopamine in there and the feel good chemicals. And so that's why it's really difficult to stop. Like the limbic system, right? Yeah. So basically addiction gets, for lack of a better word, lodged as a craving. Yeah. Like, you only should have 3 cravings: food, sex, and safety. Yeah. And then addiction gets, it becomes a craving. Like, I need this to survive. And it's not true, but I think a lot of times people have a hard time in the church world because addiction, they're afraid, like, well, if it's a disease, then that just gives people a free pass. I'm like, well, no, because you still have to take ownership of your recovery.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's like you're given the diagnosis, like, hey, bad news. Like, if I told you, like, you're lactose intolerant. Yeah. Like, okay, now, like, I can't drink milk. Like, I have to find other. Like, you're gonna take ownership of your recovery.
Absolutely.
And so that's where it's like I tell people, no, like, this, it's just the consequences. The addiction and the disease is the consequences from using. It doesn't give you a free pass. But
I think it's like cancer. Like, if the doctor tells someone they have cancer, like, they're not going to not do anything. They're going to take care of it. They're going to take steps to find out how big it is. They're going to take steps to find out where it is. They're going to take steps to find out how I can get rid of this cancer that's in my
Right.
body. And I think addiction is that same kind of disease. Like you have it in your, if you just sit and don't do anything, it's going to kill you.
Yeah.
But if you want to survive it and you want to come out on the other side, you're going to find out about it. You're going to take those steps to get rid of it. And I think that like no one, it would be obscene, and churches would be on the news if someone walked in with cancer and they said, "Hey, can you go in the back and sit down? Like we
Yeah.
really don't want you here."
Yeah. And a lot of that, it's interesting because I was talking to a friend recently about, the only reason why like a lot of rescue missions popped up is because the church used to do that 100 years ago. And so when they were basically, it was against the law to do any ministry work to the homeless, all these rescue missions popped up over the U.S. because, hey, the church used to do this. And so now we got to make these extra ministries. And now the church has been so far removed for the last 100+ years that it really doesn't know how to basically reach out to the marginalized, the addicted, like that like segment of the population.
Yeah.
And then, so they haven't done that the last 100 years for the most part. And now they don't know how. It's like, well, we don't know what this is.
So that it's basically like ministries have filled in, outside ministries have filled in where the churches have lacked over the years.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And I don't even think it's like, and I don't even think it's like, I'm not, I used to be mad about it and everything, but now I don't even think it's their fault though. Like, because like we said, you are uncomfortable by what you don't understand. And I think that's why you saying education is a huge part of like connecting the churches with addiction recovery, because once they begin to get educated on what addiction is, now they understand it, and now it's not as scary as how people look at it. And so I love that. And so looking again at the church, what strategies have you found effective? And really, education is one of them. But what strategies have you found effective in combating the stigma surrounding addiction within this religious setting? Because I'm sure you've had to at times go to churches in order to get support. And so how have you been able to really, because I don't know how much of your story you have to indulge to them, but I'm sure it helps to be like, because no one wants to help someone that's not an expert in their field.
Yeah.
And so like, sadly, our addiction is what makes us an expert in working in the recovery field. And so how have you, like, what strategies have you used just to bridge that gap with the churches that you have created a relationship with?
Yeah, I think one is like actually preventative, like reaching the younger, if you can prevent addiction or someone going that direction, like that's crucial. So like the younger generations. So I try to take that strategy of like, hey, like statistically here, here's the numbers, and you can make an impact preventatively, especially with pornography. So that's a huge addiction. So I try to like incorporate some of that. And then two, just like, hey, this is the average numbers in any given, church. And like, we can help provide resources, programs, we can take that off of your plate, besides that component of education, just the support, like, hey, we're here to help. And we can train your staff, like, because a lot of times it's, I've been called a bunch of times, like, hey, we have this problem. And it's always like a problem or whatever. I'll meet and talk, and whether it's family members or, staff that's not quite sure how to handle a specific situation.
And it'd be nice to get to a point where like we educate them, and then now we get to this point where they no longer call us to be like, hey, what do I do?
They feel
like where they're like, oh, we know what to do.
Yeah, right.
So looking at like, because I mentioned you probably had to tell your story, and then I know I've told my story many times in dealing with certain individuals, and then I'm not like, I used to be transparent, I used to be closed off when I was a student pastor about what I was struggling with, because again, we talked about it, like you have to have this mask on. And so I've found there's power in our testimony, and God has given us this he's given us this freedom, and we have to, it's just like when he talked with the woman at the well, like, go and tell people what I've done for you. And so like, there's power in our personal stories. And so how would you say that our personal stories are really able to aid in working with people that are in addiction, people that are in recovery, people dealing with mental health struggles, really aiding down and breaking down those barriers, like, because we know that it breaks down the barriers to those in the churches that we're working with. But we do, like I said, like, people want to know if you're an expert, And so when we walk up to people that are in addiction, I know the number one I think is, have you been there? Like, don't
Right.
come talking all this stuff if you've never been there. And so how do our personal stories help break down those barriers to let us into these people's lives and walk with them?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is hope. You're living hope. Yeah, you're walking hope.
Absolutely.
So I think that can inspire people to, like take the next step. Or a lot of times they just need support. Like, hey, I've been there. I'm working with a client now that thinks it's the end of his, younger and DWI and lost my license, and I'm like, hey, our peer support went through that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I should have 2 DWIs. And so like, let's walk through with you. So that's
A shared experience.
yeah, that's huge. And I'd say maybe alongside that is just the competence, like the knowledge and know-how. Like they're further along the path. That's why sponsors work, right? Like, how did you do this for 20 years?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I remember thinking like at one point, like, how do I gotta keep doing or keep not doing this? Like,
Yeah.
until
I know in the beginning, looking towards like yesterday was like a year. Like a year?
Yeah.
And now I look like I hear people 5 years. I'm like, 5 years?
20
What?
years? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I have to keep going through this for 20 years? But it doesn't like, it's like, here's the kicker. It doesn't get any easier.
Yeah, because life still, that's why the rooms are
Life
aged.
still happens.
Yeah, life on life terms. Like,
Yeah.
there's things that are out of your control that are going to happen, and you have to respond to that in a healthy way.
Absolutely. So you already touched on like the holistic side of things. How do you, and this is, like, because as we go through recovery, people that work in recovery, like there's different levels of people that, well, anybody in recovery, there's different levels of people that we have to, excuse me, have the hiccups, that we have to really interact with. We have medical, we have people that are in the faith community, family members, things like that. And so as we come to the end, like, how, looking at all those, how so for medical at first, how do we really navigate situations where medical advice, because there are times like I went cold turkey. Like, I said, you know what, I'm done with this. I'm not going to use, and I stopped. I
Yeah.
wouldn't suggest it for everybody, but
Yeah,
I
yeah.
stopped. And one thing that I've learned from working at FLACRA and going through like our group soups and everything is like, what works for one doesn't work for another. And just because MATs didn't work for you, don't down somebody who is using MATs.
Yeah.
And if you use MATs, don't go and be like, hey, you went cold turkey, you didn't do it right. And if you haven't gone to a 12 steps group, don't look at someone who is going through 12 steps and be like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And then again, vice versa. If you're not doing group work, like step work, don't look at someone who doesn't and be like, you're not really in recovery. And so there's these times where two things will clash. And so how do you navigate working with, because this recovery community is a diverse community, and everybody wants to do it a different way. And so how do you navigate situations where things like medical advice and spiritual beliefs might seem to really conflict with each other?
Yeah, sure. I really believe in like agency, right? Like, people have, God gave us the will to make choices, free will to make certain choices. So I'm not going to push my own, recovery choices I made onto someone. If they ask, sure, I'll give them, my thoughts on something. But at the end of the day, like, that's a choice they have to make. Now when it gets to like medical stuff, yeah, there's times like, hey, you are not able to make this decision.
Yeah.
Your life is in danger, so I'm going to bring you somewhere, like open access or something. Or the hospital. So that's like a life-saving situation.
Yeah.
But provided, they're in a good state of mind to make a decision. Yeah. And two, again, it's like if someone makes a decision and it doesn't work out, like they're going to learn that and have to, figure out how that affected their recovery,
Absolutely.
So yeah, sometimes you have to just like okay, well, kind of know where that leads, but like I'll still be here for you.
No, that's great. Like, and it's just it's finding what works for the person you're working with.
Yeah.
Like, and understanding again, like, that one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah.
And not pushing. I was told, like, because I'm preparing to go take the test to get certified as a peer. So like, my supervisor told me, just remember this one thing: the client is always right. And not right, but the client knows themselves best.
Yeah.
And so, like, when all else fails, the client knows the client better than anybody can know the client. And so don't push our things on them. Like, they get their plan. And so I love that. Looking at the church, because I believe people coming alongside. Like I know I wouldn't be as far as I am today in recovery if it wasn't for people coming alongside me and helping me out and being there for me and giving me support and things like that. So
Mhm.
how important is, like, so looking at the church, and then we'll end looking at like people closer, but how important is like uh that relationship between not just the church and the person in recovery, but the church and mental health professionals. How important is it for people in the church, working in the church, to come alongside mental health professionals in supporting people with addiction? Because I think that understanding, the church understanding that this is a disease, like, how many churches do we know that actually work with doctors with things like cancer and things like that? So like it makes sense that when they begin to get educated on what
Mhm.
addiction is, that they would start working with mental health professionals that deal with addiction. And so how important is that you've seen from just working, because I'm sure you've seen it within your time working in the recovery field. How has that impacted people where they've had both the spiritual side and the physical side working together as one?
Yeah, I mean, holistic approach. That is, it's usually the most effective, I think, because like if you're not able to switch lenses, if everything's a spiritual problem, or if everything's only a physical problem, like everything looks like a nail and you have a hammer. So it's like, yeah, it's like you might do more damage than good. So yeah, the places I've been around where they've had some, whether even trauma informed care, like understanding, like, hey, someone that had that reaction, like that was a trigger, like something triggered that. So um, yeah, that's very important, and especially with mental health, if like bipolar or whatever diagnosis is, like understanding, like, oh, okay, like we have to consider this, like it's not just that um, they're a bad person, and we need to set them straight.
Yeah,
They're going through something on the mental health side,
yeah.
and they need some support and extra care. Yeah.
No, that's good. Um, so I know in my recovery, and I know this is a story that something that a lot of people in recovery have dealt with and are dealing with. We we tend to hurt a lot of people while we're in our addiction. Um, and I know for me, like, my kids still won't talk to me. My parents and I were reassembling our relationship, but it's not what it used to be before
Mhm.
addiction. And so and I have really, because so I asked my dad to be on Preacher's Corner one time, and he told me uh, that, and he was transparent, and I love it. He told me that a lot of times, because a lot of times we laugh at some of the things that we did while we were in our addiction, like, because from the place that we sit, looking back at it, it's like, how can someone willingly put themselves through the things that we put ourselves through?
Mhm.
And I think a lot of times we forget that there's a lot of hurt attached to those moments. And so my dad told me, like, these moments where I've seen you laugh about, it makes me angry because those are the moments that hurt us so bad. And so I've almost not only become an advocate for people in active addiction and recovery, but I look at families now and those that we've hurt, and I
Yeah.
almost feel like I'm an advocate for them as well, because they get set on they have done nothing, they didn't ask for to be drugged through the mud through our
Mhm.
addiction, and then we get all this help, and like nobody thinks about them, and they're like, what about
Yeah.
us? Like, we have all this hurt we're dealing with. And so what guidance do you have, and to offer to not only families and loved ones, but even to people that are in addiction, but really to families who want to be there for their loved one that's going through addiction recovery, but just they don't know how,
Yeah.
because they feel their own hurt and pain that they're working through. So what kind of guidance do you have for them?
Yeah. I would definitely say like they have to go through some sort of recovery themselves.
Mm,
You know, that's why there's Al-Anon and things like that. And to like set boundaries and just like as you feel like you're healing and ready to, like maybe reconnect. Because that's what's been damaged is the social
yeah,
bond from addiction. So, and that can take just like recovery is getting back to a healthy place. Like that can take a long time. That can take years.
absolutely, absolutely.
So yeah, I'll just say get support. Find, as you said, your tribe earlier,
Yes,
and other people that can walk through you with that process too. And because trust can be very hard to reestablish, and then forgiveness, right? So you may forgive someone, but maybe you don't trust them. That might take a lot longer.
absolutely.
So yeah, I would just say patience for yourself, patience for others, and um, yeah.
Awesome. Second to last question. What's one thing? Um, Looking at people in active addiction and recovery, what's one thing that you want to leave? One piece of wisdom, because I truly believe, like,
Yeah.
if we don't learn something from what we go through, then what's the point of going through it? So, what's one piece of wisdom you want to leave with someone that may be in active addiction and someone that may be in recovery?
Yeah, I would say the right thing is usually the harder thing to do.
Mm,
So,
mm,
or as A says, the next right thing. So those little decisions on a day-to-day basis.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then lastly, what kind of resources do you have just for anybody who might be listening? They're like, man, I want to connect with him and just be able to find out what they offer. Where can people find you? What kind of resources do you guys offer? And things like that.
So Renewed Recovery, our website is renewedrecovery.org. We have online programs, so you can book time with a peer support coach. We're working on some in-group, in-person, kind of programs in Rochester. You can email us at info@renewedrecovery.org. We'd love to connect with you. And
Awesome. This was awesome. I thank you so much.
Thank you, Antoine.
We'll have to. I tell everybody all the time, like once you become a guest on Preacher's Corner, you become part of the Preacher's Corner family. And I like to have repeating guests that time. So we'll have to have you back on and have to have you meet some. I have unfortunately I started this with a co-host, and he used to live in my car with me when I was in addiction, and then probably this time a couple weeks from now, he had gotten clean, and so him and I started Preacher's Corner together. And unfortunately, he's not. He is facing time, unfortunately, now because he didn't finish out drug court. And so I'm looking for not necessarily temporary co-hosts. So you'll have to come on and meet some of my I'm doing almost like how Jeopardy did, where they got different co-hosts and everything, but I'm doing it with co-hosts. So we'll definitely have to have you on. I love that what you're doing, and I definitely want to connect and pick your brain since that's something I'm interested in eventually starting. But I definitely appreciate it. I know Preacher's Corner community appreciates it, and then just everything you do for the recovery community as a whole. And so I appreciate what you do, and I again thank you for taking time out of your day to come on here, and we do this recovery journey together. So
amen.
But that is all we have for today. If you are watching and you haven't subscribed, I don't know why you haven't subscribed yet. Go and subscribe, like it, click the bell, so you can be notified whenever when we drop a new podcast. But until then, I'm gonna put your information, Shayne, for Renewed Recovery down in the description. No problem. Then if you want to get some merch, I got that link in the description as well. But until then, always remember to love yourselves, love each other, but most of all, love God. Preacher out.